All right. Hello and welcome everyone to another Chat and Learn here with Power to Fly. My name is Mariella Marie, and as always, super excited to roll into this next hour with you all. Our guest speaker is calling all the way from Oakland. I'm calling from Patagonia in Argentina, and we've got folks calling from Maryland, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Buenos Aires, Argentina, Kentucky, New York City, Oakland again, Springfield. So let us know where you are if you're just joining us. Go ahead and drop that in the chat box. Just that will let our guest speaker just know where you are in the world, and maybe she can, speak to different things going on in different parts of the world if she is aware of that. So just go ahead and let us know where you are. Phoenix represent, I see you in the chat box. Before we get started here, I'm just gonna go over some quick housekeeping rules so that we all feel comfortable and confident in this next hour. So you could be doing anything else with your time, but you are intentionally spending this next hour with us. So we really encourage you to participate. I see we got folks already getting their pens and papers out, ready to take notes. I really appreciate you. So you can turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. That's one way you can participate. We believe in visibility here, and this is a safe digital space. So feel free to turn your cameras on if you feel called to do so. If anyone would like to speak or hop off mute, just raise your emoji hand or let me know in the chat. You can either let me in the private chat or public chat that you'd like to permission to be taken off of mute, and I will give you the permission to do that. So feel free to do so. Again, we would love to hear from you. So that's just one way we can make sure that all voices are being heard and respected. Just let me know you'd like to hop off mute and I will give you permission to do so. Now, if you do hop off mute, you will be featured in our live recording as this is being recorded. And so that just is a nice reminder as well for those who signed up for this chat, be looking out for a rewatch email. In that rewatch email, you'll get a link to this recorded video so that you can share with your community, your colleagues, your peers, and you can also rewatch it yourself to take notes and open as many tabs as you like. And then you'll get links to resources that our guest speaker might bring up throughout the hour. So be sure to look out for that rewatch email. And the last thing I'll say is we'd love for you to follow Power to Fly on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can keep up with all the great chats we've got in store for you. Now, if this is your first chat where I'm moderating, I'll take a couple seconds to introduce myself before I pass the mic to our guest speaker. So again, my name is Mariella Marie. I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. I currently live in San Martin de los Andes, the original lands of the Mapuche people. And I love speaking about the importance of emotional intelligence at home, at work, and at play. So I might bring some of my reflections at that point. If anyone else is interested in just developing, emotional intelligence work, feel free to drop those tips and tricks or questions in the chat box. Otherwise, feel free to support the project that I'm working on that is called the Positive Force Team. And you can go to thepositiveforceteam.org, sign up for our newsletter, or I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. In just a few moments, I will also invite you all to drop your preferred ways of connecting in the chat box, whether that be your social medias, your LinkedIns, your websites, or any projects that you're excited to share. I really want to use this opportunity for us to connect in this digital space and really practice what we preach here with networking and encouraging each other. So be looking out for that. Go ahead and grab your links so that you can add those to the chat box in just a few moments. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic to our guest speaker who's calling all the way from Oakland. Shivani, let us know a little bit about yourself, how you came to learn about Power to Fly, and what you're excited to share with us today.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Friday. So I am really excited to be here. I am the CEO and founder of Acend, where we offer an online leadership program for women. And really what inspired me to start Acend was I used to be in your shoes. As I was moving up into leadership, into a management role, I learned how to get buy-in, realize stakeholders, empower my teams, all by making a ton of mistakes. Some guidance are probably just a lot of blow-ups. I vividly remember walking into a team meeting and we were going to align on what the product roadmap was going to be for the quarter. And I felt so confident about the feature I was going to recommend. I thought it was obvious why we should prioritize this over everything else. But very quickly I sat down and I was started sharing my idea, and I just saw a bunch of confused and annoyed faces. People started asking me a bunch of questions like, why are we doing this over this other feature? How does this help us achieve our goals? It did not go well. And I remember walking out of the meeting just feeling like I failed. My team was mad at me. They felt like I hadn't actually valued their expertise. They felt like I was telling them what to do. And I not only was I really just disappointed in how it went, I was also really confused because I had done my work. I had done my research. I knew this was a good idea. The data showed it. And so why did that not go well? And after a lot of reflection and feedback, I realized that I actually hadn't gotten my team invested in my ideas. I hadn't walked them through my thought process. And so when I learned how to get buy-in, when I learned how to advocate for myself, empower my teams, I felt so much more confident. I was able to move up more quickly in my career and impact not only my teams, but our executives and our company's board of directors. So these experiences combined with the time I spent studying at Harvard Business School inspired me to create Acend. Our mission is to elevate 10,000 women into leadership. That's a big way we're going to see the change that we need to see in today's works. And I just realized like we currently learn how to lead and influence through trial and error. We all know that we should get people invested in our ideas, that we should push back, that we should speak up, but we often don't, either because we don't cover the time to learn how to do it, or we're not sure how to do it, or third, we're scared because practicing these skills at work is high stakes. If you make a mistake, it can cost your reputation or worse. And so that's why I wanted to create a leadership program where women can push themselves out of their comfort zone, have a safe space to learn these critical leadership skills where they actually build habits around it. It's not just theory, it's like actually put it into practice, and then be able to do it while they get to learn with an awesome group of women. So that's really what led me to found Acend. And it's just been amazing to see how the women from all kinds of companies from all over the world, like Google, Salesforce, Slack, DoorDash, Starbucks have come out of the program just feeling much more confident and being able to move up faster, including getting promoted. For example, Diana, she is a marketing lead at SAP, and she got promoted soon after coming out of the program because she was able to drive better alignment in her meetings, and she started the program helping her do so. And I share that example with you to just highlight like how important influencing is. It was because she was able to drive that better alignment. It was because she was able to better position her ideas is why people recognized her achievements, is why she was more successful in meetings, more successful at work, and that helped her get promoted. So I'm really looking forward to today diving into more about influencing. And I see a lot of great questions that come in, and I'm looking forward to like talking about those.
Amazing. So I know we're going to learn more about your journey as you answer some of these questions. But before we get to the questions, can you set the stage for us by covering some principal themes for today's conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to go over 3 key themes. First, like, why do we fail as leaders to get buy-in? I think before you can learn how to do it, you got to figure out what are you doing wrong currently? And there's like, and I found, from working with hundreds of people and, just studying like different people, like I've just found like there's like 3 big mistakes that we make. So I'll go through that. We can talk about that. What are the 3 things you should be keeping in mind to help you get buy-in? And like really, I'm always all about action and accountability. So it's like really specific, like what are things that you should be doing to help you get buy-in? Because I think like when we talk about influencing, when we talk about getting buy-in, it's such a vague term. We're like, well, how to do it, but like, what does that actually mean? And sadly, we're never taught this. And so I'll talk about some specific things you can do. And then of course, we all run into difficult stakeholders, dominant personalities. That's part of working. You can't choose who you work with, but often there are key people that you have to get support from. And so it's how do you win them over? How do you make sure your team has your back? So those are a couple of themes that we'll hit on today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right. I see more people turning their cameras on. I know you all are excited to hear what Shivani is going to share with us today. And I know you've got another important slide that you want to walk us through before we get to the questions. So please take your time covering this slide, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Yes, for sure. So, so I'll combine this with, the 3 big reasons why we fail to get buy-in, because when we fail to get buy-in, we feel stressed. It's frustrating. It hurts our career growth. It hurts our reputation at work. We're not successful in projects. Our team struggles to hit their goals. And I find that like the 3 key reasons why we fail to get buy-in is 1, we assume that the right answer is obvious. So, when that blow up I was telling you about with my product team, when we were aligning on the recommendation for the quarter, I was so focused on like what I thought was the right answer. And I was like, it's going to be obvious to everybody else. But I forgot that we all have different sets of information. We all have different motivations. And so first, it's like the right answer is not obvious. The second is we're up against a time crunch. So we're up against a project deadline and we feel like we don't have time to go get buy-in. And the third reason why we fail to get buy-in is because we're afraid someone's going to dissent. You're afraid someone's going to push back on you. You're afraid someone's going to say no. So you're like, before they can do that, let me just push this project through, or let me just submit this, or let me just slip this into the deck. When I go present it at the group meeting, it's like they won't be able to say anything. They'll just like have to come on board. All these things, maybe you win in the short term, but very short term, but in long term, you're going to have many problems. You're not going to be seen as someone trustworthy. You're not going to be seen as someone's collaborative, and your projects aren't going to be successful. You're going to hit a lot of bumps along the road. So instead, now that we talked about why we fail to get buy-in, I want to like put forward, like, here's the Acend framework to help you get buy-in. It's like, I often hear, it just feels like there's a secret language that people know on how to influence. And when you look at the top leaders, what the biggest thing they have in common is that they all know how to influence. And if you think about it, it makes sense. They are not, as a manager, you're not actually doing the work. You're guiding your teams to do the work. And even as an informal leader, whether, I work with a lot of engineers, product managers, engineering managers, sales, marketers, and everybody has to know how to get buy-in to get their teams on board, to work cross-functionally, and to get their senior people on board. So the Acend framework to get buy-in is really focused on, 6 things. So first, building allies. Think about who are the people who can help advocate for your idea with you. So social proof is powerful. The second is storytelling. This is probably Ascender's favorite part of the program because they know great leaders are great storytellers. And so understanding, how do you position your message in a way that's easy to follow? What is that narrative that you're going to create that is and how do you structure even a comment in a meeting? If we're being honest with ourselves, most of our communication at work happens in ad hoc settings. So how do you communicate? How do you structure your comments? How do you position our ideas in a way that really resonates with your audience? So we spend a ton of time in the program doing that. Then around co-creation, so getting people invested in your idea, bring them in the thought journey. What does that actually mean? What are the exact steps you should be following around that? Empathetic listening. I think when we often hear about listening, at least when I do, I'm like, kind of roll my eyes. I'm like, yeah. But I realize that actually so often when I'm talking to someone, especially in a high pressure situation, or maybe I just find them annoying, I'm so focused on what I'm going to say next that I'm not even really paying attention what they're saying. So if I ask them a question, I'm already thinking about my response back so that's why like empathetic listening is so key. And I think unfortunately often overlooked. And so that's like a big part of getting buy-in, is really putting yourselves in that person's shoes, paying attention. The numbers and data, your opinion, just because you think so, is not enough. You need to have that rationale to back it up. And the last thing is around demeanor, presence. So how you show up, how you position yourself, what your verbal and nonverbal cues are all going to impact how people perceive you. So, like how composed you are matters. It's not just about your message. So when you have all these 6 things present, we go deep into these in the leadership program and what specific strategy you can use. When you have all these things present, then you are able to successfully influence. And I've seen this happen hundreds of times where as people very quickly within a week of using the strategies, they'll be able to get buy-in on ideas that they previously weren't, or be able to save meetings that were going downhill because they've applied these strategies.
Love everything about this. I'm seeing so much emotional intelligence stuff happening on this slide. And I love that you flagged the importance of empathetic listening, and that even from your own personal journey, that I can also raise my hand and say that it's just too easy to think of what you're going to say next and to kind of shallowly listen to the next person, whether that be someone you're working with or, a family member. And so it's just, we have ample opportunity to practice this 4th point here with empathetic listening. So I'm happy that you put that there as well. And demeanor, right? Like knowing your self-awareness, knowing how to carry yourself, how to be confident in that, knowing, not comparing yourself necessarily to anyone else. And that also comes with some emotional intelligence training as well. So let's jump right in, because you all have submitted some great questions. I'm going to try to not go off on one too much, because I want to get to as many questions as possible today. Now, if you hear your question come up and you're here live with us, please let us know that you're here. And, we just want to make sure that we're getting your question tackled. And if you have any last minute questions that come up, or, any questions that are being considered now and that maybe, might get your mind churning, please use the chat box to add any of your own tips and tricks, any, extra new questions. Again, we want to hear from you. So let's start with this first question here that was submitted previous. How can I get over my shyness and overthinking while conversing with someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that one to kick off. I think, I've worked with many introverts. We have many introverts in the program, and they would and I don't think necessarily introverts correlated, you have to be shy, but I think often people would describe themselves as that. And, how can I get over my shyness and overthinking while conversing with someone? I would say first, preparation is key. So before you go into that conversation, thinking about what is your goal for the conversation? Who is your audience? What do you want to communicate? And even like just writing your idea out. And you can do this for any situation. So in the leadership program, week 1, people get the storytelling. They get a message preparation worksheet when we're talking about storytelling. And really there, it forces them to like break down before they go into a meeting, like who is my audience? What do they care about? What are their concerns? And we'll have people who are super shy, who don't ever speak up at meetings. And when they use that worksheet, like by the end of the first week of the program, they'll come back and be like, I spoke up in all my meetings, even with senior people. So it's really works. Like the more you prepare, the better you will be at that. And the overthinking is combined with that, right? Like if you are prepared and you're thinking about like, okay, if you actually write out your comments, because I think so often we're like, oh, but I'm so busy, I can't prepare between meetings. But actually, you have to carve out that time, because it's much better for you to like maybe do one less meeting, or like what I would do when I would always like either like come to work like 30 minutes early or in the morning, carve out time, or like stay like 30 minutes late, and then just like look at my calendar for the next day and prep. And I know like people have full lives. And so I think you got to figure out what the right balance is for you and how you're going to do that. But even just like spending a couple of minutes before the meeting, because the thing is like if you're not speaking up because you're too shy, or because you're overthinking a bit, you're like, well, I don't know if I have all the information, or what if I'm wrong? Then you're not doing yourself justice in that meeting. You're not doing the project justice. You're not helping your team be successful. And so it's worth carving that out that time, because it's going to go a long way in the meeting. And then the other thing that I've seen that happens, like people like don't speak up in the meeting, and then afterwards they have to go do follow-up. So we had one of our ascenders, when she came in, she was like, I don't speak up in meetings with senior leaders because I'm nervous. Like, I don't want to be wrong. Like, then what she would do after the discussion in the meeting, they would reach a conclusion. And then afterwards she would grab the meeting organizer, share her idea. The meeting organizer would be like, oh, that's a really good idea. Like, let's revisit this with the group. So then they would reopen the discussion. And I pointed out to her, like, that's actually not productive. Like, one, people aren't getting to see the great idea you're contributing because you're doing it in the background, and 2, you're not contributing to a productive meeting. So that's why it's like so important to prepare in advance. And then the other tip I'll give is practice in low stakes situations. So, maybe you are someone who is not comfortable. You don't have to go to your senior leader to talk. Maybe talk to a peer. And you're like, I'm going to go to this meeting. So when I, early on in my career, I was really nervous about making comments in meetings, especially because I was doing M&A I was at PayPal, and I would basically like be in rooms with a lot of like really senior executives. And I was this like 24-year-old, like, what am I doing in these meetings? And so I got like this really great tip from my manager. He's like, write down your comment before you go into it. So I would literally write down my comment before I went to the meeting, and I would be so focused and just like, when can I say my comment? And then I would say it, and I'd just be like, okay. And then I can focus on the meeting. So like figure out like, what is a strategy that you can use to help you get comfortable? Like, but do low stake situations. Maybe you don't even do it in a work setting. Maybe it's like you're at a restaurant and you want to ask them to move you to a better table. And assuming the restaurant's not that busy, like ask them. If they say no, it's not a big deal. But at least you're getting over that same kind of like nervousness and stress that you feel, that anxiety, the tightness in your chest that you feel when you're having that conversation at work also.
I love that. I'm just jotting some questions down, and actually I've got some follow-up questions based on your response, but I want to just like start to practice what you're preaching here and invite folks to the links to their preferred ways of connecting. And then if you want to do role play on, if you got a big presentation coming up, or you got a big meeting coming up, and you don't want to practice, I'm going to say, too much active listening because you're not being proactive to speak. You can connect with some of these like-minded folks here today and ask, if you can take 15 minutes to have a virtual coffee and role play. I mean, I think that would be really interesting, in my opinion, if I, was just really terrified to share my voice in a meeting, or like give my presentation, maybe doing some role play with some folks here on the call. So I see some folks already dropping their preferred ways of connecting. And I challenge you all to reach out to a couple folks. And especially if you're in this position where you feel like you're shy, or you're overthinking, or you don't want to take up too much time in a meeting, connect with some of these people, be mindful of everyone's time, of course, and see if you can carve out 15 minutes. I think that's interesting. Okay, so Shivani, I want to.
One thing I'll add to that is like, I 100% like agree on role plays can be really helpful. So in the leadership program, we curate small groups of, I describe my committee as like high caliber, but low ego women. And we do a lot of role plays or like discussions, and people find it so helpful. It's empowering in itself to realize, oh, wow, I'm not alone. A bunch of those smart, qualified women face the same challenges as me. So then when you go to the meeting, you're not like, if someone is like shooting you down, you're like, hey, this is not even about me. Or like, wait, I've heard about this problem before because like someone else had it. So here's how I need to tackle it. And the second thing is when you role play, it mimics a lot of the same feelings that you have in real life. So I highly recommend doing role plays. We do that a lot, and it's been really valuable for people.
I love that. I love that. Okay, Shivani, I wanted to just ask some follow-up questions based on your response. So showing up early in the digital space, how do you do that? If you can't show up to the actual room, I love this idea of practicing what I call spaciousness, so that you arrive to the space, you get comfortable with the space, so that if you do have to speak or you have something important to do, you're already like, you know the walls, you know what's happening, you know when that weird noise comes off, you're not freaked out because it's going to interrupt you. But how do you suggest showing up early or just being prepared in digital space if you're meeting, on Zoom or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would think about what are the things that could potentially go wrong, and then also just be comfortable in the space. So for example, of course, when you're virtual, your internet can cut out. And so I have a hotspot that I have a backup. So any important meeting, I'll have it turned on. So if my internet cuts out, I have this hotspot. Or like you plug in your Ethernet cable, like just simple things like that are really important. I would also, if you're going to be sharing slides, I would just make sure, I would just get to the Zoom room early. And because sometimes like if you're using a new tool, it can take a while to get logged in. So even if like the host is not letting you in, at least you're set up on your end, you checked your sound. And the other thing I would think about is I will sometimes just hop on Zoom by myself and just like practice like hitting screen share and like running through my presentation and recording myself. And it's so helpful. So yes, you can't show up physically in that space, but you can mimic a lot of the same feelings of like, what is it going to feel when I screen share? Is that going to work? Is like, how is my slides going to look? What do I come and how do I sound as it? Because I mean, the beauty of being on virtual is that you record everything. So like when you record yourself, you'll see exactly how you will come across to your audience, which we don't have that luxury in the in-person world. Obviously there's like trade-offs, but so those are a couple of things that I would just suggest doing around it. And then just make sure you're in a quiet space. So I think that's like internet cutting out and then like background noise. And I also understand, I think right now with everyone with the pandemic, you're going to work from like where there's like work and personal and family and all the lines are blurred and crossed. And so maybe you don't have an opportunity to have a quiet space, but as much as possible, having that not only for your meeting attendees, but also for yourself. So you can just like focus on what's happening in the meeting.
I love those suggestions. Thank you so much for dropping that. I know those were some additional questions, but I knew
I love that.
I've heard people. Great. Yeah, I've heard people ask, and especially for people who aren't used to, working hybrid or working remote, maybe it's just like really a big conundrum. Like, how do I do this? So thank you for that response. Now, my next question is for what can upper management do or allies on the team? Maybe they're not managers. Maybe they know you have, you need that extra invitation to speak out at a meeting. What are some things that they can do to make sure that, the shy person on the team or the person that might need that extra invitation in that space, what can they do to make sure all voices are being heard?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And there it's really thinking about that's part of creating an inclusive environment. So it's about how do the individuals on your team thrive? And so, for example, if someone is not comfortable speaking in a large group setting, then perhaps you consider sending, if you're going to have a brainstorming session, like send the materials beforehand so people can brainstorm on their own before they get into that meeting. One thing that I used to do with someone on my team who was shy and like told me that she wasn't comfortable was we had trust. And so I asked her like, hey, like, okay, and when I go in the meeting, can I create space for you if you haven't spoken yet? And she's like, yeah, sure. So in the meeting, when I go in, I'd be like, or like, towards the end of the discussion, if she hadn't spoken yet, I'd be like, Beth, do you have anything to add? And she could say yes and contribute, or she'd say no. But because we'd had that conversation earlier, she knew that I wasn't putting her on the spot. She knew it wasn't because, if someone just like says that to you without any context, and you're like, oh no, I feel pressure, I have to say something. But because we had that understanding from before, it was actually a very low stress way for her to enter the conversation. So I'd say those are a couple of things that you can do to create that inclusive environment. And the third thing is, I'd say, like, just ask your team, like brainstorm with your team for how to go do it. And maybe all the ideas won't work, but even the fact that you're having that conversation will make people feel like you genuinely care and will make them feel more comfortable speaking up in those kind of settings.
Awesome. Great advice. Great advice. It's like a fine balance, right? Especially if you find yourself in a leadership role. It's like, how do you make sure that you're creating an inclusive space while not micromanaging? And actually, this next question deals specifically with micromanaging. So let's go to this next question here. How can I get buy-in from a micromanaging boss? What are the best ways to avoid micromanaging when I'm finally in a leadership role myself?
Yeah. So I've definitely had my share of micromanaging bosses, and I know how frustrating it can be. So I would say, anytime you're trying to get buy-in, you want to understand people's motivations. I think when we are trying to get buy-in from a stakeholder, whether it's our manager or a peer, too often, if we get the no, we're like, oh, they're just being so difficult. But you actually need to pause and be like, well, why is that happening? So maybe they're micromanaging because it's just like they're insecure about their role. Maybe they're micromanaging because you are new to the team, or it's you two are like new to working together. And so you're still building trust. They're still trying to figure you out. Maybe you two just don't have good communication, and like you think you've communicated what you're working on, how a project is going, but they don't feel like they actually have a clear understanding. And so it's really understanding like, what is that issue that's happening there? So I think you can reflect yourself, but I would even just have that conversation with your manager, like going to your manager and be like, hey, I know, I know we really want to like work well together. I want to make sure I'm driving the best impact to the team. I want to make sure I'm taking things off your plate, position in a way about like, you're trying to be helpful, and be like, how can I do that? How should we communicate together? Like, what point should we sync in? Like, should we sync up? And so like creating a game plan in advance is really helpful. And so like that's like, I'd first like start with that before. And then if you're trying to pitch an idea to a micromanaging boss, again, like set a really clear, like plan first, like position, like how will they succeed? Think about what they care about. And that's like a lot of the Acend framework. And we dive a lot of it into this program, like exactly how you go do it. But it's like about like, how do you frame your ideas in a way that shows people like how they will benefit? And then once you do that, create a really solid game plan around, like what are roles and responsibilities? When do you check in? And that usually helps alleviate some of the micromanaging. Now, if your boss is just like really insecure in their role, no matter what you're doing, then I think that is, you just have to be like really, really proactive about that. And eventually, if it's not getting fixed, then you just have to make a decision whether or not it's the right fit for you. It's not an easy decision. It's the harder path. So hopefully you don't get to that, but those are some steps you can do in advance. And how do you avoid micromanaging is, one, if you've gone through the experience yourself, then be reflective. Be like, I'm not trying to be that person. Think about what is that person, what were they doing that made you feel uncomfortable? Especially when we become new managers, I'd say one of the hardest things that we have, that we struggle with, is delegating. Often it's like, well, I know I can do this piece of work 10 times better than the other person. Or, I feel weird asking them. And so what you think is being helpful and being productive is actually your report can see as like, you don't trust them. You are micromanaging them. So like really thinking about like, what are like, just giving them the scope, let them make mistakes, and just like set up a clear plan of what success looks like. And yeah, but I think like the fact that you're asking this question means that you're going to be less likely to be actually micromanaging when you move into that leadership role.
I love that. I love that. And actually, there's a great acronym that I want to bring up just to piggyback on what you're saying. FAIL, FAIL, first attempt in learning. And I think if we just all give ourselves that wiggle room, that when, especially if we are, sharing empathy with the other, and we know that when we first start something, or we have to change things up a little bit, we have this learning curve. And to just add that, that empathy there, so that we're not losing trust or thinking that we have to micromanage. So I appreciate your perspective there. All right, so I have a private question here that I'd like to raise. What if you know you are a leader based on your life's experience, but haven't really worked in a traditional office atmosphere. Can you give any advice about entering a company? Basically, how to gently show our leadership without overpowering a new situation when you can quickly see things and have a burning desire to share.
Yeah, I would say, leadership is not just demonstrated at work. We show leadership in every day, whether it's with their families, friends, and whatever you're doing. So I was suggesting about like, what are the qualities of a great leader? So showing empathy, giving clear direction, and empowering your teams, and showing like when you're going to that role, just thinking about like, what are the examples that you've had, volunteer work, family life, where you've demonstrated those skills and leveraging that. And the second part of the question around like, how do you kind of surface your leadership without overpowering? I would actually reflect on like, why is there attention there? So a good leader will help guide the team, will bring people along their thought journey. So if you, as like for example, always explaining the why of your recommendation or driving things forward. So if you're doing that way, if you're building strong relationships, then it shouldn't come across as overpowering. People should be excited to hear from you.
I love that. I was just dropping in the chat box. It's great because at the end of last year, which it's like super crazy to actually even say that, I led a chat with a beautiful thought leader who is speaking about equity and emotional intelligence in the space as well, about just this, how we can all impact. And it doesn't and lead, and it doesn't just need to be at work. And how, if we use our power skills that we're calling power skills now instead of soft skills, how we can, generate that and just have it flow in all aspects of our lives. So even if we don't hold the title of, leader in this company, we can still demonstrate leadership in different things that we do at home and at play even. So I'm actually going to drop that link in the chat so you all can access that. And Shivani, love for you to watch it as well and give me your feedback, because it's a new space, right? Where we're, historically speaking, folks like us, women, people of color, we've not had an opportunity to show different ways of leading, and especially in these spaces that have asked us to check certain things at the door, and now we're like, no, we want to be our authentic selves. How can we do this differently? How can we do leadership differently? And just with that that last slide that you shared, your breakdown, it just, for me, that just flips the game. If we went back like 20, 100 years, not even 10 years, I don't know that would necessarily be listed in the important framework for leadership. So I love the work that you're doing.
Sounds great. I love that.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How do I continue to push for what I feel is the right solution, perhaps a provocative one, that's not getting traction with upper level leaders?
Yeah, so I would again think about, what are people's motivations? If it's not getting traction, then why are people pushing back? So I've done this myself, and I've seen hundreds of ascenders do this, and so many people, where you're pushing for a solution that you think is right, but you're forgetting that other people have different contexts. So for example, one of our ascenders, she is a designer, and she was pushing her manager to have their team move over to a new design tool. And her manager kept saying no. And the ascender was getting pretty frustrated. She's like, this tool is way better. Like, why aren't we doing this? And so she offered to the manager, she's like, I'll do all the onboarding work, so you won't have to do anything. Like, I'll just make it really easy. And the manager still said no. So in the leadership program, we were talking about the situation she was facing. And I was like, did you ever ask your manager why she's saying no? And she's like, no. And so, like, it sounds so simple, but we actually often forget that. We get so caught up in our own head. And then she went in and asked her manager, and it turned out is because the new tool did not have a feature that the manager needs to use. So no matter how much the ascender put in effort to make it easy, she wasn't able to solve that problem. So if your idea is not getting traction, understand why. And then the other thing is, I would also consider, like, just because you feel it's the right solution doesn't make it the best solution for the company, and doesn't mean, like, if you have to modify your solution, it's not a loss. We are, your job is not to come up with the best idea. Your job is to execute on the best idea. So often, for the most part, actually, most of the best ideas come by collaborating with others. That's something I learned in a really painful way when I shared the example at the beginning when I went to meet with my team on prioritizing the product roadmap, and I was so focused on my recommendation. Eventually, what led us to be successful is when we collaborated as a group and we came up with a solution that worked for that like had all these different inputs. So I would figure out also like what is the right solution that actually like meets the broader needs instead of just like what you think is the right solution.
I love that. We have to like let our pride down, right? So it's like, oh, they're not taking my feedback or they're not taking my idea. Maybe that means I'm doing something wrong or I'm not being heard. But I think we're also in this really pivotal time where we need tons of ideas. There's so much opportunity to do things differently and shake things up. And really the skill set of being a leader, I mean, just letting everyone know that we hear you, but maybe we're going to go with this one first and keep it coming, without stepping on any toes. I mean, it's such a fine line. So I love that you're raising that as well.
Yeah. And I'm gonna also, I'm dropping in the chat, like the get buy-in checklist. So this is the framework that I went through in the beginning with a little bit more detail. And so as you're thinking about getting buy-in on this idea or whatever idea you have, like just follow this and this will help you think through like understanding what are the motivations for your group, what are the different steps you should follow. We go into much more detail in the program, but like this can be a good starter as you're thinking through this.
Great. Thank you for dropping that link in the chat. And actually, for folks who are rewatching this and they might not have access to the chat, what's your website? What's a great way for people to get in touch with you so that they can follow up?
Yeah, definitely. If you go to weacend.co, then and then you can navigate through there to go learn more about the Acend's leadership program, which is a 6-week online program for women dedicated to helping them develop the skills and practical tools to help you influence and lead at work and be able to get promoted faster. And then you can scroll through. I have a bunch of free resources on the website too. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn at Shivani Bery or on Twitter at Shivani S. Bery.
Awesome. Thank you, Shivani. All right. So question here coming up from Luanda. How do you handle a manager who doesn't like questions? They see the questions as resisting. And actually, I'd love to bridge this question to a previously submitted question. Maybe you can, maybe they have something to do with each other, maybe not, but I'd love to just hear you reflect on this. And it reads, how do you effectively work with a person who is constantly trying to not work with you? For example, saying they never saw your messages, ignoring requests and instructions on new tasks, sending stuff to you that is not your job, etc. So again, Lawanda writes, how do you handle a manager who doesn't like questions?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say, I would understand again, why they don't like the questions and figuring out why they don't like the questions, and figuring out what is the best way to surface this information. So if, for example, if you are coming into, maybe they don't want the questions in a one-on-one, maybe you should write it in advance, send it to them so they can reflect on it before you come into that conversation. Then I would just put an honest conversation with them around this. I would ask hey, what's the best way to, I have questions. Here's why I need these questions answered. So talking about what is the problem that happens. You're not asking these questions for the sake of asking these questions, and understanding and then understand what's the right medium to surface these questions to. If someone is resistant or if they are super busy, then I would also be really mindful of packaging the questions together. So don't keep sending them one-off questions, group them together and prioritize them. So it makes it really easy for them to go through it. Same way, similar, if someone is being unresponsive to you, you send them stuff and they're like, oh, I never received it. Well, have a conversation with them to figure out, okay, well, what is the best, here's why this isn't becoming an issue. And then what is the best way for us to fix this? And then I would also have a written trail if this problem is surfacing. So if they do say that, you can point back to and be like, here's where I sent this to you. And so, if you know a pattern, and then at some point you might need to escalate it, but really having that written documentation and having a conversation on what's the best way to engage can be really helpful in just getting clarity.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How do I regain trust in my leadership role after making a mistake?
Yeah. So first I would reflect and think about, have you actually lost that trust? Often we make bigger deals out of our own mistakes than others might perceive it. I know I've definitely sat in meetings where I said something, I'm like, oh, I could have said that better. And I will think about it for the next 24 hours, even when I'm going to sleep. And when I talk to someone else about it, they're like, we didn't even notice that. So really asking yourself, are you like, first, is this like an actual thing that has actually lost trust? Two, it's understanding like where do people lose trust in? And then it's really important to like overperform on that area. So, if it was something where you said like, yes, I'm 100% sure of this data. And then actually comes and they go present it at a meeting and then their manager is like, no, this is wrong. So now you just made them look incompetent and you embarrass them in front of their leadership when they trusted your word. So then it's like, of course, owning your mistake, apologies go a long way. So instead of you trying to like skirt out of it, like be like, yeah, I made this mistake. I'm really sorry. Here's what I'm going to do to fix it. And here's how I'm going to change this going forward to avoid this mistake. And the second part is just really checking your data and over communicating. And so when you, for example, when you go give them the next set of data, they're probably gonna have some doubts about like, is this solid? So have some backup to show like, here's how I went through it. Here's my process. Create extra time where they can review it and ask you any questions. So I think the more transparency you're able to provide in the process, the more trust people will have that they can rely on you.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Yes, I was just going to invite you to take a sip of water because you've been dropping a lot of knowledge and I want to make sure you're hydrated here.
Thanks.
All right, so let's move on to this next question here. This is actually one of my favorite questions that was submitted previous to this conversation. I'd love to just hear your opinion. Do you think current events, COVID, justice, local unrest, are having any new or surprising effects on leadership styles?
Yes, I definitely do. I mean, I think the past couple of years, 2 years now, which is kind of unbelievable to think that it's been happening for 2 years, has really flipped what we think about how we work, what the lines between work and personal life have been fully blurred. So yeah, I think it really has. And then the thing is like, we've all been going through, or not we've all, but like for the majority, like people have been going through like similar struggles, or at least can relate at varying, I mean, obviously there's varying degrees and depending on your privilege and depending on like where you live, like it has impacted you in a different way. For the most part, people can at least relate on like a certain level. So I think it definitely has caused people to like reevaluate, and burnout is really real. And so it has caused leaders to be really, and the conversation to surface more, or even with social injustice, like all these conversations have now bubbled up to the top. People are like, I've had enough. I'm burnt out. This is not okay. And so I think it's forced leaders to be more empathetic, because if they're not going to be, then, and there's the great resignation happening right now too. So it's like, you like be empathetic, because and then people are realizing like, okay, like I don't have an option. If I'm not going to be able to create, like my team might leave, or they're just not, or they're going to be unproductive because they're so burnt out, even if they want to help. I think it's also forcing people to reevaluate that good work, there's no one standard definition. It no longer follows the traditional mode. So, you can be really productive from home. Whereas earlier, I've heard so many stories, people would ask to work remotely. Maybe it's because they're like just becoming parents, or like they are like, this will allow me, or I have a long commute or whatever it is. People will be like, no, you're not gonna be as productive. But now we actually see like, yes. Or it's okay for you to like turn off for a couple hours, take care of something, then come back on. So I think it definitely has had like a huge impact on leadership, and has forced everyone to question or to realize that what we thought would not work can actually work. And I'm hopeful that it will actually force people to be more open to experimenting for like what is a work environment, and be more conscious of how do you create inclusive environments in a way that's going to have like a much more positive impact in the future.
Yes, absolutely. I agree 1,000%. I just want to let everyone know we've got a little under 15 minutes left. So if you'd like to share your voice by hopping off of mute, just raise your emoji hand and I'll take that as a cue, or just write me in the public chat or private chat, and I will give you the rights to do so. And I'm just going to go over one question first to see if I have anyone who's taken that invitation. All right, so let's move on to this next question here. How can I channel my self-motivated, creative, entrepreneurial voice in a way that will be understood and valued within my current, very corporate environment. I have a lot to offer, but finding my place in the hierarchy feels too passive.
Yeah, great question. So I would kind of figure out, you want to find the overlap of like what you bring to the table, the strengths, with what the company needs. And so if you're able to show your company how the strengths or your entrepreneurial or creative approach drives value, then they're going to be open to it. If it's going to be about like, here's what I think is right, then people are going to be receptive to that, especially if you are changing the way people are working or the way people operate. So it's really about, and that's really what like influencing, getting buy-in comes down to, is like, how do you position your ideas in a way that shows how others win? And so I would do the same thing here. I'd also break down like, what does that mean to you? Like, what does finding your place in the hierarchy mean? And, you know, like, what is the impact that you want to drive? What's like how, like, what is that role that you want to play within the company? And then, yeah, and then tying it back. And then, you know, and then lastly, I would add is being reflective, be like, maybe this is not the right company culture for me. Maybe I've tried it, but like, you know, they're just not going to value this approach. And that's a very realistic outcome, because different companies do operate differently. And while, you know, it's always like a pain and it's like often hard to find a new role, but like maybe you decide, it's a very personal decision. You decide like, okay, this will be worth it because this is something so important to me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. We've 11 minutes left, and I'm just now getting that a note that my internet is unstable. So just let me know if I need to repeat myself. I'm crossing fingers for the next 11 minutes here. So this question reads, how do you seek out opportunities for leadership, especially outside of work?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, volunteer work, definitely. Then people are always looking for smart people who are passionate and committed and can apply their skills to like help drive forward really impactful causes. So I would look at like, think about like, what are you interested in? What are the areas that are like really need support? And then just go offer their support. And when you go do that, you know, you need to offer like a meaningful commitment in order to actually drive a real change, and actually order to like, and then also if you're trying to learn leadership, you need to offer a meaningful commitment. So you go through like the ups and downs of leadership. It can't just be like, I'm gonna dedicate 3 hours this week and then like done. No. And so I would say leadership, I mean, I think even like being a parent or like so many roles that we play in our life, like demonstrate leadership. How do you bring people along with you? How do you make them feel supported? And like planning group trips, like I'm usually like the default planner for like in our friends group. I just end up being like, I love organization, I love planning. And so I'm always like, okay, like do the checklist, and, you know, and like, how do you rally people together? So like, there's a lot of leadership there. So just figure out, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity. It's really up to you to like go create that and be proactive about it.
I love that reflection. Thank you so much. Okay, so I have a private question here. I'm going to read the question first, and then I'm going to read a little bit of the reflection so that you can get more of the context. So this question reads, how have you seen positive ways companies have honored people on both sides of the vaccination argument? And this person writes, I have lost all my work in New York City due to COVID and the vaccine mandates. It has caused me to think this year is my last year there. Also, people have had little to no compassion for people who are not on the you must have the vaccine page. I would just love to hear your reflection there.
Sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes, the first part of the question reads, how have you seen positive ways that companies have honored people on both sides of the vaccine argument?
Got it, thanks. I'm not sure if I've seen enough examples on both sides of the argument to really be able to answer this question. I think it's, and you know, it is like a very, yeah, it's a complicated decision, right? Because it's kind of social good versus like personal choice. I think you have to figure out personally like what is important to you, and then see like, hey, like what are the parameters that I have to like play within, and if they don't fit me, then like, yeah, I have to initially change it. Obviously, as I said before, even if you have to leave the company, it's not ideal, but then I think it's important to recognize like, what are things I can change? What are things I can't change or I don't want to change? And then like go drive that forward.
Thank you for that. I know that that was a last minute question and very timely, as I know just globally speaking, a lot of people are asking this question. So I thank you for that private question. We're all figuring things out. Good luck to everyone. And actually, there are a lot of people that are pivoting careers for several reasons, and maybe this is one of those reasons to maybe change careers or start your own jam, so your own project, your own company, if you have access to that or you know are interested in that. So there's hope for sure. All right, so we've got about 7 minutes left. Can you still hear me okay? Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so let's roll with this question here about resources. Do you have any books or podcasts you recommend for very seasoned professionals? It seems like most self-help books in this area are geared towards newbies.
Yeah. So I would say in terms of podcasts, I really like Brene Brown's podcast. I mean, I'm just a big fan of Brene Brown in general. So even Seasoned Leaders, I think like her books, Daring Greatly, like all three of her books are really fantastic. And so I would highly recommend her books, and then her podcast is really great. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, also very great. It's, you know, it breaks down a lot of things about how do you influence people. Radical Candor by Kim Scott has been, so the first one was Brene Brown, Brene Brown, Brown. Radical Candor by Kim Scott breaks down like how do you give feedback in a way that really resonates with people. So I would really check out her book. And actually, I recently did a fireside chat with her, which is really awesome. Her and Trier Bryant. Here, I'll drop that in the chat too, so that you get to hear like a little bit about like the Radical Candor. And then also she just came out with a new book called Just Work, where she talks about like how to create more inclusive and supportive environments and remove prejudice. So those are some of my recommendations, where people go deep. And even if you're a seasoned leader, I think there's so much that you can still pull away from these conversations, because like topics like feedback, how do you show vulnerability at work, how do you influence, is something that we all need to keep working on.
Yes, and actually, this is such the way that you reflected on that, on the resources there, and I love the books that you referenced as well. This last question speaks to that actually. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Again, if anyone has any last minute questions, I'll try to get to them, throw them in the chat. But we're gonna wrap up with this question here. So I am a speaker and trainer in emotional intelligence, and I'm often invited by senior leadership to deliver my engaging training, but they don't usually show up for the training themselves. I would love your perspective on why it is so critical to have the senior leadership participate in the trainings they provide and expect their workforce to attend, and how to communicate this to my clients.
Yeah, I mean, I think the leaders need to role model what the behavior they expect from their team. So if they are telling their team, hey, emotional intelligence is really important, you should go, but they're not going, then what does that really say? So I think it's important to point that out to the senior leaders. So if they're saying, I'm not going to come, then ask them like, why? And then again, showing the impact. This is like, again, you're trying to get buy-in from them that they need to attend this meeting and you need to position it in a way. And really, and you can use other examples of, for example, setting boundaries of like how late people work. One thing I'll often do is I won't actually send emails at night to my team or Slack messages. I'll schedule them to be sent. Even though I'm online late, I'll schedule them to be sent in the morning. And so if you're trying to tell people like, hey, you don't need to be online late, or if you're trying to role model, like we need to have a feedback culture or a culture of taking failure, of like taking risks and accepting failure, then you need to role model that behavior. And same way with emotional intelligence training. If you want other people to go and value it, then you need to show up too. And actually you need to be the first one who is vulnerable in that and participates in that. So I would think about, use the get buy-in framework that I've shared, and to get people bought in on and just have that conversation with them and show them the impact, help them understand what happens if they don't show up.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you for submitting that question, whoever did. And I really appreciate your reflection on that. So we've got about 3 minutes left. You dropped so much knowledge in the past almost hour. So can you leave us with some food for thought just to wrap up this conversation? For folks who might be finding themselves in really, annoying situations. I think that as you referenced to some examples in the beginning, or just, how to just keep their head on straight and keep being their authentic selves in these situations where times are ever changing and, we are calling for new styles of leadership to happen. Can you give us some food for thought and then remind us how we can get in touch with you when we finish this conversation?
Yes, for sure. I have loved this conversation. So many great questions. So I would, the parting thought I would say is you are the best advocate for yourself. So if you, for example, are in a meeting and not speaking up, then how can you expect other people to tap you for new opportunities? How can you expect other people to create speaking roles for you if you yourself are not speaking up in that meeting? If you want to go get promoted, then your company might provide you some resources to help, but eventually it's actually on you. Like you need to go create those opportunities for yourself, whether it's asking for us to work on certain projects, whether it's taking on trainings, developing skills. And so I would say like really be mindful, like where do you want your career to go? What do you want your work life to look like? And then you taking control, like what do you need to do in order to get to that? And so, even if you're the best manager, you're still the best advocate for yourself. You're the one who's thinking deeply about your career. So I would just say that we're kicking off the new year. And so I think it's a nice time to reflect, think about like, what do you want to get out of this year? And then what do you have to go to learn? Like, for example, the Women in Acend Leadership Program, we're like, I really want to learn how to influence. I know that's going to be a critical thing for me to move up, whether I'm an contributor or a leader. Maybe it's for you have to learn some technical skills, like whatever it is, like go take that opportunity instead of waiting, because the waiting, like nothing's going to change. You have to change it. So that's what I'd say. Like you are the best advocate for yourself. No one else will do it for you. And so really like go take that opportunity, carve out and like seize that opportunity, ask people, get their buy-in to like support you on that path, but like you're the one who has to go drive that. You can find me so you can visit, if you want to learn more about the leadership program, you can visit weascend.co. And then you can click on Acend's leadership program to learn more. Our applications are currently open for our upcoming cohort at the end of February. It's already 50% full. The energy is so good. We have women from Google and Salesforce, Slack, Starbucks, but a ton of companies. So if you're interested, if you found this conversation valuable, we dive into this and so much more in the program. Then you get to learn with an awesome community of women. And then so that's weascend.co. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Shivani. Thank you, everyone who's joined us live and whoever's rewatching. Good luck to everyone. You can do it. We believe in you. And again, feel free to connect with We Acend. I love that you all are just, challenging the space and that it's fun above all. So thank you so much for sharing your words, your work, and we'll see you on the next chat, everyone. Take care.
You have a good weekend, everyone. Bye. Take care.